Great. Thanks, Ted. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our virtual discussion of evolving ESG considerations. I think if you're on this call, you recognize that the last decade has held dramatic shifts in how environmental, social, and governance issues impact companies, investors, and directors. While many industries included sustainability, social impact, and good governance as part of their standard practices in the early 2010s, ESG considerations became more explicit for companies to address both in initiatives and in public reporting. ESG issues that investors and companies focused on included climate diversity, equity, and inclusion, sustainable operations, carbon emissions, labor relations, on and on. However, with pending SEC reporting requirements for ESG, there's been increasing criticism of ESG requirements, reporting, and evaluation of ESG impacts. I would say this has really picked up in the last 6 months and has a strong, at least in the US, strong political backlash. So this discussion is really meant to, as Ted alluded to be a discussion of the challenges of ESG, the value of ESG, and how those dynamics are changing. Ted used the word debate. I was told this could not be a debate, that it should be a friendly discussion, and I think all of our panelists are going to be aligned in keeping it that way. I, for one, enjoy a healthy debate, but I'm going to sit on my hands and make sure we all behave. So let me introduce our esteemed panel this morning. First, Elise Forcelina, a partner at Egon Zehnder, has led their U.S. health and leadership advisory practices. She advises clients on a wide range of talent-related matters, including organizational design, succession planning, board composition, and recruitment and retention of executive talent. She has a distinguished career in the health sector with previous roles at McKinsey, IMS Consulting, and Vector Securities. Thanks for being here, Elise. Hal Bank-Jorgensen is the CEO and founder of Competent Boards, which provides training and advising to board members, leadership teams, and investors on ESG issues. She has numerous accolades for her pioneering role in advancing sustainability, green, and ESG programs. She's trained as both a lawyer and a public accountant, which terrifies me. So thank you for being here as well. And then finally, rounding out our panel, we have Rob Clyde, who has decades of experience has decades of executive and cybersecurity experience and has served on many corporate and nonprofit boards. He currently serves as non-executive chair for Crypto Quantique, executive chair for White Cloud Security, and is a director for Cyril Inc. He was the CEO of Adaptive Computing, CTO at Symantec, and co-founder of Accent Technologies. So thank you all for joining us today and sharing your expertise. I'm going to start with some pre-formed questions to our panelists, and hopefully we'll get a good discussion rolling. We will take questions, and I would invite folks, if you have an urgent question, to put it in the chat. But we'll also open up for kind of verbal questions towards the end of the session. All right, so let's get started. In the increasingly complex environment that corporations function in, and with expanding oversight responsibilities of the board, including into specialized domains such as cybersecurity, board composition and dimensions of diversity are becoming more challenging. Elise, can you start us off by discussing the challenges and best practices for board composition, size, and specialization considerations?
Yeah, you bet, Ivy, and thank you for having me, and it's nice to see some familiar faces as well. So it's a really important question. You know, it's unusual that you have the opportunity, either as a board member or a chair or as a person like me, to build boards from scratch, although we've done that in several occasions, particularly when there's a SPAC or a carve-out, although oftentimes there's people who come with the deal. I've heard from many board chairs, as well as chairs of NomGov, that the bogey around board composition seems to be changing from regulatory bodies and from stakeholders. So it is frustrating and unclear oftentimes. And when we're brought in, we're oftentimes asked to really help think not just about who should be the board member, but the composition. Let me do my best to kind of give you a couple themes that I'm seeing in terms of the requests from my clients. The first is on composition, content expertise. I think as the next generation of CEOs come into roles, they are requiring and interested in more depth of content expertise on their board, balanced with expertise in governance. Examples of this might include technology, cyber, industry experience, customer perspectives. I think what's really key and unclear is how to manage that content expertise on the board versus in the management team, and that can be quite delicate, and it's worth a conversation. The second is, you'll not be surprised, and I'll use this phrasing purposefully, which is diversity of perspective. Broadly defined, a balance of different perspectives, including generational balance, depth of board experience, and a range of personalities and thinking approaches. I would say this kind of diversity is often overlooked and can really not be solved by looking only at gender or physical aspects or other kind of outward aspects of individuals. And honestly, boards can be very hesitant to bring on someone different from them because they're worried about someone disruptive in the boardroom. So I think they're really wrestling with how do I get outside perspectives, outside thinking, but keep the boardroom safe and well run. The third is recency or relevance. Maybe a subset of this diversity of perspective, but anyone who's been retired from full-time employment for over 5 years since 2009 did not live through COVID. The world has changed so dramatically, not just around what's happening in the workplace, what the demands of employees are, what the talent issues are, what the geopolitical issues are. So it's important that CEOs and boards really have people, some balance of people who have lived and walked in the management shoes recently, not just those who have operated in a past construct. I have two more. One other consideration on composition is potential to serve as a chair, particularly audit. I think boards get really stuck on that, on thinking about audit committee succession, because you do need a QFE in the United States. And one of the challenges is getting people either who have that experience and really thinking about board compensation with that in mind. And then the last is, it's really surprising to me, this is either by design or by happenstance, how many boards do not have experienced public CEOs. And as we're seeing a generational shift in CEOs, getting the right CEO, whether or not he or she is active or retired on the board, who has walked in the shoes of the current CEO, particularly if he or she is relatively new, can be very helpful to manage and help translate between the management and the board. Those are kind of the key thoughts that I would have on board composition.
Great, thank you. Hal and Rob, any follow-up comments, additions you want to make?
Yeah, I would just echo how important the things are that Elise has mentioned. I think one of the items to do as a board, and I'm sure she's been involved at this at Egon Zehnder, because I've used recruiters to help fill board positions, is the importance of doing a gap analysis. And as a board, be very intentional about what are the must-haves for the open positions that we have. Also somewhat intentional about when it's time for somebody to roll off the board. And so, you have to make room to actually get somebody, but doing the gap analysis can actually help in both of those exercises for what needs to happen there, and look for that diversity of background. Certainly one thing I've learned is that you could bring on somebody that has the background you were looking for, but frankly is not a good fit for the board. And they just simply don't have the ability to serve well as a board director, and they turn into a project. In fact, we even called it that sometimes, a project. And you assign somebody as a mentor to try to get them ready to be a great board director. And they just didn't have enough C-suite experience or experience in other boards to really ever get there. And it was disappointing for both the board, and for the individuals involved. So I would definitely not downgrade the importance of board readiness and fit for our board as criteria to look at after you've done the gap analysis and you're looking for the specific kind of experience and background. I'd also just want to mention recruiters can really help to make sure you have enough women on the board, you have enough representation from other areas. Certainly on some of the boards I've been on, that made that process so much easier. We got enough that we could actually do those things.
If I should add, and I think I'm echoing everything you already said, but I think what I'm seeing at the moment for board of directors from all over the world is also to be ready. So look at the skills matrix, not only as what should that skills matrix look like right now, what should it look like in 5 years? And make sure that we have that transition into the boardroom of the future that really are well suited for both the company, but also the society that that company is going to live in and hopefully thrive in. Where in the world do we want to sell our products? Where in the world do we want to have our employees? Where in the world do we want to get our supply from? And I think a lot of those aspects needs to be thought about, not when you are in the situation, but now. And then you can start figuring out what kind of board members do we need to oversee the transition, but also what kind of board members do we need when we are, at that point, and have them ready. So it's not a panic situation. And totally agree in terms of going to Elise and to get those board members. But the more we can say that in advance, the better the chance that someone is out there and hunting the right hats for the positions.
Great, thank you all. We have a couple of questions that I think we'll just add in now as we're on topic. First off is, what is your view on T-shaped skills in the boardroom due to the interdisciplinary nature of change? Particularly highlighted here in the question is tech and ESG, digital and cybersecurity. And I think this is a great statement. Contextual intelligence is becoming a new normal. This was directed to Elise, but I'm guessing all of you have something to say about it. So maybe we can round robin this again.
Rob, why don't you go? Because you've got real expertise in this area.
Yes, well, as a techie, I started my career as a software engineer, so I'm still intensely interested in technology. So I think the world has gotten to a point where you can find experts in those areas, and I think especially technology, which often will include cyber and cybersecurity, is getting easier with people that have C-suite experience, maybe even have board experience. That used to be very difficult in the past, but I think getting somebody that has a strong business background as well as a technical background is not impossible. Those people are out there, and I'm interested to hear Elise with her experience as a recruiter, but they're out there. And it is quite possible to find people that are like that. I would just want to emphasize, don't give in on the business understanding and the ability to serve well as a board director from a governance perspective in order to get somebody who has one of those specialty areas. I think we've all learned that lesson.
Yeah, maybe I'll add to that. So it's very often that we are asked to find a technologist for the board, usually a CTO or perhaps a CEO or a CFO of a software or digital company, oftentimes outside the industry in which they are operating, in an industry that the company aspires to emulate or grow or evolve to, right? So I do a lot of work in healthcare, which is the most behind on anything, so we can go anywhere. Financial services, for example, is an obvious place. But I think the real challenge that we find is that the board oftentimes needs to really ask themselves the question, what is the role and responsibility of this person versus our current CTO? And are we plugging for management team challenges, right? Either knowledge, and what are we actually trying to solve for? Do we need to, because you could solve for that in building, an advisory board, for example, not necessarily putting someone on the board. So that's one, and I would encourage boards to really ask that question. Who is your CTO? What are their strengths? And when we think about a board member, what would we want in this person to round that person out? The second thing is, Rob, I totally agree with you. I think where we kind of get stuck is not all CTOs necessarily have that business acumen or have grown into that business acumen. And so while we can find many great CTOs, the ones that have really had exposure to their own boards and can really talk the business are still small, right, as a percentage. So if you are a CTO, what I would say to develop yourself to be a board member is make sure you are getting exposure to your board and really understanding how to operate in the boardroom and talking to your CEO about giving you that opportunity, because I think that's really differentiated.
And if I should add on again, I believe that T shape is important. I do not think we only should have experts sitting around that boardroom table that talk their own language, not understanding the language of the board and the language of the business. I think we need to start looking at people with geopolitical insight. We need, the AI, all of these things we're talking about, sustainability. And I was smiling, at least when you were saying the healthcare is not ahead. Actually, when it comes to sustainability, we did a survey of the Fortune 500 companies. When it comes to sustainability, healthcare is actually in the top, where it's not just one person around that boardroom table. It's the board of directors as such that have that insight. And I think that is so important. And I see those people that we take through the upskilling, some of them are to learn, board of directors, to speak the language of sustainability, the language of geopolitical issues, the language of AI, etc. And for those in management, it is actually some of them to speak the language of the board. And what I see often is that we are not having that alignment. So a person like me, yes, you said I'm a lawyer and an accountant, and I think I understand a little bit about sustainability and all of these other issues. I can translate, but sometimes we have the board of directors saying the same thing as people in the business, but they don't understand each other. And that's a missed opportunity and frankly, a lot of waste of time and resources.
And as a CTO, I was once CTO of Symantec, as you heard, I will tell you what helped me. And I was fortunate. I served under John Thompson, who later became the chairman of Microsoft. And I'll never forget, early in my tenure there, he stood up in a meeting with about 4,000 of us. We were larger than that, but there were about 4,000 in that meeting. And he said, "Everybody's a salesperson, raise your hand." And dutifully, the salespeople raised their hand. And then he said, "You should all have your hands up. You are all salespeople." And so what I would suggest for CTOs and other technologists, and frankly, anybody that is a specialist, could be in anything, could be sustainability, find ways to get involved on the go-to-market end of your company. I was fortunate. I got very involved in that, was heavily involved in many sales activities. At another company, I even did a stint as a chief marketing officer. So, got to know some of the go-to-market ends of the equation. There's nothing like being on the revenue generating side of the equation to help you round out your business skills. And the fact that you are a technologist should not keep you from being able to do that. The fact you're in sustainability should not keep you from doing that. There are always ways to get involved on the money-making end of your company, and that really helps you to understand the business.
Great, thank you. Well, my next question, which I'll start with you, Rob, I think actually dovetails really nicely on this discussion. So given the diversity of issues that boards will face, and often the diversity of, if if your board is composed this way, the diversity of expertise you have on the board and perspectives and views, you're not always going to be an expert on every issue that hits the table. So what approaches have you seen as successful in getting board members up to speed on some of these pressing issues, whether it's AI impacts, as Hal suggested, cybersecurity, regulatory change? Interested in your experience.
Yeah, so yeah, I have had a little bit of experience with that with diverse board members, and as you would guess, I'm learning things as well. So I've had to spend time becoming, fortunately, I've been involved with many companies, but ensuring that my financial acumen was where it needed to be, and taking courses on that and really understanding that. I think every board director should know where their gaps lie and what is a good enough understanding. They don't necessarily have to become experts. So one of the important ingredients that we've used in boards I've been on is a budget for continuing education for board directors. That can include, be a full board member of the NACD. It can include, insisting that board directors get certified in certain areas, such as the NACD DC. On cybersecurity, there's a great certification as well. There are courses you can take in AI from MIT and other locations. So having a way that directors can, in fact, get educated about areas that interest them and that they think are important to the company, and have that be directed and funded and somewhat guided. On one board, we actually had one of the directors who led a small committee that was just around board education to be sure that we were providing that guidance. A few other, kind of practical things. AI. We should, if you haven't played with ChatGPT, play with it. It's not difficult. That'll help give you a little better understanding of what it is we're talking about. In fact, ask it a question of what makes the company you're on the board of better than all its competitors, and see what ChatGPT says. It might amaze you. It might be spot on. It might be off, but it'll certainly help you better understand things. When it comes to some of these some of these issues like AI impacts, cybersecurity, and the always changing regulatory environment, having experts, both internal and external experts, coming to the board, I think, is crucial, and guiding them to help make sure, and sometimes it's the chair that needs to do this, or perhaps one of the committee chairs, that they will educate the board on what that board needs to know, what's relevant to them and their industry. In particular, I like to know what the tipping point is if it's a new technology like AI or Internet of Things or other things. What's the tipping point? And we were all amazed when ChatGPT came out, but the reality is the tipping point for artificial intelligence, and since I spent a lot of time on it, I know this well, was actually, and had long been determined, would be when an artificial intelligence actually defeated a grandmaster at the ancient Chinese game of Go. That occurred in 2016. If our board was doing what it needed to be doing about being up to speed, somebody should have said, hey, we just hit the AI tipping point that experts have been around. AI is going to be a big deal, and we better pay close attention to it. That was now almost 8 years ago. And that's kind of typical with other things. Quantum computing. What's the tipping point for that? And many believe the tipping point for that is when it reaches quantum supremacy and is able to solve problems in certain areas much faster than a traditional computer can. And we may not be far from that. So just understanding tipping points, bringing in outside experts, and I'm just giving examples, but everything has a tipping point. The outside experts should know that. And as a board, when we know we're hitting the tipping point, that usually doesn't mean we've hit the point where it's taking off and it's mainstream. We've hit the point where that's going to start happening at a very rapid pace. And we better be paying attention to it on both how we use it and what the risks might be for that particular item. So I think those are kind of key things. cybersecurity, I would say, let's keep a close eye on what's happening with the SolarWinds CISO. As many of you may recall, there was a major breach with SolarWinds from, it's attributed to Russia, was actually a group that was paid by Russia, but it was essentially a nation state attack. And it caused a lot of issues. The SEC has now sued both the company and the CISO. And CISOs are watching this very carefully. Couple of things to learn. One, does the CISO have sufficient standing in the company? Are they a member of the C-suite? Do they have access to the board of directors? And do they have a say in the sign off on disclosures, especially disclosures that involve cybersecurity? This seems obvious that they would, but they don't always. And sometimes CISOs report much lower in the organization, but they have the title CISO. And the result can be very negative if they don't have those things. The second thing is if the SEC is successful with this lawsuit, in fact, whether it's successful or not, this has already happened. And I know the CISO well. Tim Brown used to work with me at Symantec, so he and I are quite close. But it's going to have a chilling effect on people wanting to be a CISO. And we're likely to have to ensure that CISOs have sufficient support from legal and that they have sufficient support on disclosures they might be signing off on. Already, I've learned from Tim that the amount of insurance, director of D&O insurance, probably needs to be upped far higher for a CISO to cover all the legal costs that they're likely to incur. So there's some real learnings that are happening right now in the realm of cybersecurity from a regulatory perspective and from a risk perspective for the CISO in terms of a position. It's kind of heading in the direction as the risks for a CFO. And so we need to kind of figure out how to handle that situation as we move forward and really pay close attention to that aspect. Again, outside experts can help.
Kelly, you look like you have something to add. Lean in.
Yeah, I so much would love what you say there. And I think it's also how all of these things are interrelated. Right? So one of our faculty is from the Niels Bohr Institute working with quantum. And, you know, that's related to cyber because we can all go out and say, well, we have done everything we can. And it's not if, it's when it happens. The thing is that's probably we already have whatever it's called in our systems that as soon as quantum technology or computing is there, have access to all of the information we have. So as board of directors, we need to know things like that so we are prepared. And I love the fact that you're saying, you know, go out and play with ChatGPT. I think there might have been board members that went out and said, okay, instead of reading 1,000 pages, let's put those 1,000 pages in. And now I have 10 pages that I need to read. And by the way, can I also ask, you know, what kind of questions should I ask when I get to the board meeting? Now we're just giving away our secret informations. And things like that we need to really think about. I know now that there's a board in Asia that now have a robot as a board member, and I said, well, how are you going to you know, you can't put that robot in jail. Well, you can sue. You know, what are the consequences of all of this? And I think as board of directors, we need to ask those questions. We might not know fully what the answer, but if we're not asking the questions, well, we're not really preparing the management either to go out and figure out what are we going to do in these situations. We are living in a brave new world. Lots of questions out there.
Maybe, Ivy, if I could just add on. So I think this all makes a lot of sense to me. It's, but I just wanted to pull us back up, which is, I think this is true for all specialists. That includes finance, HR, legal. So if you are a functional leader in any way, shape, CISOs, mean, obviously technology is on the mind of everyone. And I would say technology is probably the most requested functional expertise on a board right now. But, you know, CHROs are getting on boards. People have different minds about GCs, whether or not they want a lawyer on the board. Hella, I don't know what your experience with that is. But I do think Rob's recommendation around making, when people ask me, what can I do to get on a board? I say to them, have the best executive experience possible, right? Really understand the business model. So to the extent you can move around the organization at any point in your career, take a role that's maybe more in the business versus in the function, it really rounds you out as an executive. And make sure if you're in the C-suite that you do have access and experience working at least with your committees, if not in front of the board. It's really defining in terms of your value proposition as a potential board member.
I have to say, we did a survey about the future boardroom, and yeah, the lawyers and the accountants were less in demand. So, but at the same time, it was also not only, as you're saying, people with C-suite experience, actually also getting other people into the boardroom that can ask the questions, because we need to see around corners. We need to think the unthinkable. And with all due respect to all of us that have grown up in businesses, sometimes we don't see the obvious. And sometimes you can get a person in saying, what about this? But you just need to ensure that that person, going back to what you were saying, you want a person that is not so disruptive that everything else stop, but understand the business, understand the organization and the limits, etc., but can ask a question in a way where we start thinking, and so we are prepared. I would rather, and I've been out there in articles and Financial Times Agenda, etc., saying that I would rather have that we had the activist internal in the boardroom that's saying, what would an activist ask us about? What would this group ask us about? Then I get it from the outside, and then I have to panic and say, oh, why didn't we think about that? So I think they're kind of like an argument for also starting to figure out, how do we bring other not CEOs into that boardroom, and how do we make sure that they become the good board members that we need and that we are as a team.
Yeah, and one of the challenges is we bring in people that have functional expertise and are specialists in certain areas. I've certainly experienced it as a technologist and cybersecurity expert. You run into the risk as a board director, if you're an expert in any functional area, I've seen it with CFOs, you run into the risk of wanting that function of the company, of the board that you're on, to run the way you would run it. And I think that's a huge mistake. And so, we do have to ask ourselves, why couldn't the way they're doing it work, and be really honest about it. That's maybe not my preferred way, but they're running the company, and move the discussion up to, do we have the appropriate oversight, and not trying to get your preferred methods of execution in the narrow area that you might have expertise in getting adopted by the company. And I just would suggest that as well. Boards need to watch out for that. Boards need to kind of see when we all naturally have areas we're very comfortable in, need to be willing to challenge a director that's heading down that particular path. Say, hold on, why couldn't it work the way they're doing it? It's different than what you like, but why couldn't it work?
So Rob, you just teed up my next question quite nicely, which we'll start with Hal here. Thinking about that relationship between what's management's role, what's the board's role, and in some of these specialized areas, how does the board provide oversight when you're getting into these either deep technical or regulatory or specialized areas? I'd appreciate your thoughts, Hal, if you want to start this one.
I'm happy to. And yes, we kind of like already started it. And it is a very, very good question. And I think especially at the moment, it seems to be blurry from time to time. You know, as you were saying, the world has changed. The world is changing every single day now, right? Michael Tresco was the chair of Unilever, you know, and part of the faculty is saying like, you know, 24/7. And where we in old days could discuss around the boardroom table and figure out what do we think about this, it's coming right at us, and we need to have that answer right away. But I think to your point, governance, the board's role is oversight and foresight, and the management's role is execution. And that is also where we, from time to time, when we have a CEO to become a board member, no, it's like, well, I would do it like this. No, now you are in a totally different role. But I think at the same time, the board needs the insight to ask intelligent questions. I'm the type of person that says there's no questions that dumb questions, but we need to make sure that we're asking intelligent questions where we actually have the insight, but also know what does good look like. Because it's not enough that I'm asking a question, and I'm seeing that at the moment. We have people on the investor side sitting with their cheat sheet, and then we have on the other side sitting with another cheat sheet, and then you can tick off, yeah, we asked a question, yes, we got an answer. No one is going to get any value out of that. So we need to know what good looks like. As I said, I don't believe that we need everyone to be an expert in one thing around that boardroom table, but we need to know, everyone needs to know about the other aspects, not in detail, going back to the T-shape. Believe that we need to have the boardroom that can discuss the issues, make the informed decisions. And to do that, you need to be more informed on so many more topics than you did 30 years ago, some would say 3 years ago, right? Things are changing all the time. And I think that's where this interplay between the board and the management in specialized domain, being that cybersecurity, we call it, we can say AI, sustainability. It's more than just a balancing act. It's actually, we need to start having this strategic partnership. It's not about saying, oh, I would have known better in a situation like that. You actually need to work together. So what I see from time to time where the management is using a lot of time on pleasing the board, but then going back to, let's go back to work, or the other way around where board saying, okay, I at least asked these questions. Again, that's not good, efficient way of using our time. So I think, and that's, to NACD or, competent boards, I think that's where getting the insight, getting the foresight becomes so important, that you have that education, upskilling programs. That's not just about providing the information. It's actually about transforming perspectives and enhancing decision-making skills. I can see here we have, from competent boards, we have kind of like people coming in from all over the world. And it's this safe space to engage in deep dives into where you have real cases that you discuss, and you put yourself in the situation saying, what would I have done? And that you can bring back, and you benefit from the other board members, the other executives, investors, and you participate in that peer-to-peer discussion that I think we need to have, not only on a local level in terms of geopolitics or AI and cyber and ESG, climate, biodiversity, modern slavery. There's so many issues that's coming up, right? And it's not just about this, that, well, I got my education tick mark. And yes, now you actually need to put into your disclosure statements, at least in Europe, and let's see, in terms of level of competences, sustainability, cyber, climate, and other matters. But I think we need to kind of like get to that point where it's continuous learning, and where we equipping both current but also future board members with that foresight and skills to ask the right questions and effectively guiding management. Jim Snabe, who is another one of our faculty, who's the chair of Siemens, but also was at Maersk, says kind of like, when do we ask management to step on the brake, and when do we ask them to step on the speeder? And I think that having that global network of global community, where for us we have over 55 countries, right, where you can learn and you can leverage the leadership and navigate all of these complexities of today's corporate world with confidence, competence, and create that trust that we need so deeply, both with the shareholders but also with the stakeholders, in order to be board of directors, but also a company that success. And I think for that also we need to make sure we have the boots on the ground and really understand all of these issues.
Great. Well, I'm going to have us switch gears a little bit here to another topic. So over the last few years in particular, there's been growing pressure for companies to be responsive to employees around a lot of social issues, other environmental issues, et cetera. Elise, can you talk a little bit about how you view the responsibility of boards and management to respond to employees as stakeholders in decisions, and then turn it to your colleagues as well?
Yeah, thanks, Ivy. And I think this addresses one of the questions in the chat as well around, like, how do we actually think about that relationship between the board and hot topics, right, which are very emotional right now, particularly for employees. Before I answer that question, let me just come up a few levels, because I think I'd like to share a little bit about how we're evolving our thinking around the responsibility of boards, and this is changing and evolving. Traditionally, boards are thought about governance bodies. We'd like to really challenge that thinking, and for boards to see themselves as stewards, right? And I think that goes back to, Helly, what you said, which is, insight and foresight, right? Stewards of responsible leadership that creates long-term value for a business. I'd like to just put that in your head as a board member and as someone who could be potentially a board member, how we're encouraging people to think about it, which is really a bit of a change in mindset around what the responsibility and accountability. So how might a board achieve this stewardship? We think there's really three main kind of levers. One is around interconnectedness, really recognizing that your organization is a system within a broader world, and that one decision has implications across a variety of dimensions. Another way to say this is keen understanding of stakeholders, customers, governments, policymakers, employees, investors, et cetera. And I'll come back to the employee piece in a second. The second is inclusiveness. I know that's a buzzword, but I think from a board perspective, holding yourselves and the management accountable for the diversity of perspectives. Employees are particularly interested in holding the board accountable, although it's difficult, right, for them to know exactly what the board member brings without exposure. And oftentimes they're left with just a checkbox exercise, which may or may not seem the right answer. So this goes back to the communication question. And then I think the third thing we'd encourage boards to think about is building resiliency. Adopting a learning mindset. We've talked a lot about board members having a learning mindset, always kind of challenging themselves, getting educated, and understanding the relationship between risk and opportunity, and constantly challenging assumptions. It should be expected that boards and management teams have to pivot. The game is changing, as we said, nothing is certain. So maybe just, food for thought on those three aspects of how we're encouraging boards to think about their responsibility. So if we come back to the question of its relationship with employees in that context, employees have always been a stakeholder, but mostly because they were investors, right? And it mostly was the top team, right? Through the technology business, right? More and more employees are investors. we should note also, and Helen knows this well, that oftentimes in Europe, in certain countries, there are representatives of the employees actually on the board, which has its own interesting implications. I would not necessarily say that's a solution, but it's interesting. But look, the challenge of CEOs and boards is understanding the needs and desires of their employees with a clear line that their responsibility is as a steward. Yeah. This may mean they choose a different direction, which may be at odds or with or different from the ask of employees. In which case, acknowledgement of their perspectives is absolutely critical, as is clarity around the rationale for whatever decision they make. And, this applies obviously to any, we've all been reading the headlines, so I won't mention the myriad of issues that are coming up. And I can't give any specific guidance as to whether or not you should or shouldn't comment. What I would just say is, look, make sure you've got employee representation, make sure that you discuss it as a board, and make sure it's consistent with the board's role and what they believe is focused on kind of stewardship, accountability, and also communication.
Can I just say, I totally agree. I wrote a book called Stewards of the Future. And the one there is called the same. It's just because Diligent bought 5,000 copies of it. So that's like this.
Maybe I can give a quick example that actually goes right along with what Elise and Hella were just saying. So I was on the board of directors of an organization called ISACA that has 170,000 members, the largest association of cybersecurity and IT audit professionals, and makes a lot of money. It is a nonprofit, and we had chapters in over 230 countries, and very widespread. Along comes, by the way, we had active professionals in both the Ukraine and Russia. And as you might guess, our members are very vocal and love to reach out to board directors and expect us to always listen carefully to what they're saying. So we have stakeholders, we have employees who are stakeholders. When Russia invaded the Ukraine, both employees and most members were of the mindset that we needed to immediately disavow the Russian chapter, get rid of the Russian chapter, and kick all of the Russian members out of the organization and have their certifications no longer valid. A natural reaction, an emotion you could totally understand. As you could guess, many of our Ukraine folks were especially in that camp. And to Elise's point, our job is not as a board and as management, because management needed to advise us on what to do here. Our job was not just to please those most vocal individuals in a highly emotional and charged issues. I mean, literally lives had been lost of some of the people on both sides that knew people who had been killed in that war, and so extremely emotional. At the same time, the United States government prohibited all transactions with Russia, so we could no longer take money from our Russian members or certification holders. Tough issue, and to the point of clarity, we wanted to make sure we did the right thing and we were clear about this. We came to the conclusion that for those individual Russian professionals, it was no fault of theirs that their government had decided to engage in a war with the Ukraine. And as it wasn't fair to destroy their professional lives by kicking them out and revoking their certifications, which would have destroyed their professional lives. And so we came up finally with the solution of and this is true to this day, we would no longer take money from either Ukraine members or Russian members during the duration of this war, but we would allow them all to still be members in good standing and to keep their certifications valid. And if they wanted to attend, a webinar, that was fine, but we couldn't take money from them. And we clearly indicated that this was our choice. It did not make everybody happy. And I want to emphasize that sometimes the board has to make a decision that doesn't make everybody happy. But interestingly enough, after the initial grumbling in the first couple of weeks, because it was well stated, it all kind of died down and it became the new norm. And we haven't had a lot of issues since. I'm not on the board anymore, but still talk to friends there, and it worked out. So I think that's part of what we have to recognize. We can't just listen to the most vocal and just do what they say. That's not our job as stewards. Very well said. As stewards, we actually have to figure out what's the right path for the organization, and it's not always easy decisions.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm going to suggest that we pause the final question that I had and open up to questions. I'd invite folks to come off mute if you have a question you'd like to ask of the panel. While I'm waiting to see people pop off mute, let's start with Rocio's question in the chat. How do you reconcile approaches to ESG in Europe and the US? While there's backlash in the US, there's a push, at least from a compliance perspective, in Europe. There's a tendency to localization, but still the interconnection is huge. Anyone on the panel have thoughts, want to respond to that question, get us started?
I guess I can start. Yes, it is very complicated at the moment. You can have things where it's by law that you need to do in Europe and it's almost illegal to do in the US. You have the regulation now in Europe that is also including companies from all over the world to report on. So there are clearly some challenges there we have now in terms of the greenwashing allegation and in both, and so there are regulatory changes, but there's also some of it also perhaps the mindset, and I think it goes back to what we're talking about here, is how do we ensure that we have the right insight, the right foresight, but also the right mindset, if we can put it like that, to think not only long term, because many are saying, and like the only way we can get to the right long-term results is making the right short-term decisions. But often we think about things in silos and then like, okay, let's do this, and then we get to this. So I think there's challenges at the moment, and we're seeing it with financial institutions. We actually also insurance institutions in that looking at things in different ways.
Maybe I'll just come in. I think the stewardship concept that sounds that it really resonated with everybody is really the kind of basic framework by which the board should be asking itself, what is our responsibility? Because I could answer that question with, you better get a really good general counsel and a really good head of regulatory. The board's responsibility is not to solve that. That's the responsibility of the management team. The board's responsibility is to ask the right questions, particularly around help us understand this better, and what is the risk, and what are the scenarios that you assessed so that we can guide you on what feels right. And that could be using outside experts as well. But I think that's really the key on these very difficult issues, is what should management be accountable for, and what are the questions and the responsibilities of the board? It's not always clear, but if you think about being stewards as the long-term value of the business, I think it helps frame what your role is.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, to be pragmatic, not dogmatic, particularly in the United States at this time of divisiveness. It can be very easy to either intentionally or unintentionally adopt the language of a particular political party in the way that we're stating our position as a company. And I think the board's responsibility is to ask management, when they're making a decision and they're putting the communication plan together, what is the risk? Are you picking a side? And if it sounds like you're picking a side and you didn't mean to pick a side, probably need to do some more thinking. The reality is there is common ground in all of this. Nobody wants dirty air, dirty water, a planet that's warming so fast that it's dangerous. Nobody wants any of those things. You won't find people who want those things. Where we differ is often in what's the pathway to get there. The more pragmatic it is and the less aligned it is with a particular set of talking points by very divisive organizations. Political parties naturally try to divide. There are other divisive groups. The more trouble we're going to have. And the more that we align on things we all care about, Europe cares about it, and they've taken a certain approach from a regulatory perspective that companies have to figure out how to ensure they comply with it. I totally agree. Get general counsel, get regulatory experts to help with that. But we also have to recognize that this could be a very divisive issue. And as a board, we're not going to do the communications plan, but we can ask, is this going to sound more inclusive and like we're in touch with the average person out there, or is this going to sound like we took a side?
And I think that is so true. And that's also why we need to ensure that we have around that boardroom table people that can ask those questions and have diversity of thought, but also from different parts of the world, or at least can get that counsel. And I can see it in our global network that people are asking, what are you hearing? What are you doing in that regard? But I can also, I can share that the study of Fortune 500 companies where US companies actually, when it comes to sustainability, not much, but a little bit higher on the level of the full board in understanding some of the material issues. So it's a very interesting and developing area at the moment. But stewardship, I think we all agree that, and as I say, stewards of the future.
Great. I think we have time for one quick question. Kwaja, if you want to.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Great day to start this morning. Fabulous panelists. I have a three-part question where each question touches one of the panelists. Maybe the panelists can add one comment to that question. As we all know, generative AI is accelerating. Technologies are available. Now we are in the implementation phase. What kind of impact does it have for cybersecurity? Maybe Rob can take on that with the acceleration of generative AI. What kind of impact it has for sustainability? Maybe Heli can comment on that, because the huge computing demands a high energy footprint with AI. And what are the talent implications in the context of Gen AI, right, from the board or to all levels of the organization? Maybe Alice can add a comment on that.
Sure, I'll start with the cybersecurity and AI. So AI is both an opportunity and a risk. When it comes to cybersecurity. I'll give you one of the obvious risks that we're already seeing. Phishing attacks are now being put together by AI that are practically impossible for human beings to be able to assess. This is really something we've got to come to grips with as companies. Believe it or not, many companies deal with phishing attacks by trying to train us to detect them. In fact, I even know a CEO of a company that I was on the board of that got caught in their company's test and had to go to remedial training. Great use of time for the CEO, by the way. We've got to just realize that it's going to take technology, and technology can detect these attacks. The technology exists today and can automatically avoid them. So let's make sure we use technology where it needs to be used, and that we use time and training of people where they can actually help, and not waste time trying to train people to do things that AI and computers could actually do better. So that's a general comment relative to technology in general, but certainly cybersecurity. And AI is actively being used to help detect attacks, help detect the potential attack surfaces in organizations, and to help with things like categorizing, classifying information. And I think we're at the very beginning of the cycle of the huge opportunities for AI. We're also at the very beginning of understanding what the risks are relative to AI. Already there are AI is being used to automate attacking systems and to do what a really skilled hacker or penetration tester would do, and to use AI as a way to make that simpler. AI itself can be a risk, as we heard. If I just put my board deck into ChatGPT, that's a real problem. That there's nothing that says that's going to be kept safe. So, we do have to think of what these risks are and to help educate board directors for those areas that are needed, asking management to come back with an understanding of what the opportunities for the company relative to adopting AI, whether it's cybersecurity or elsewhere, and what the risks are that the companies face is, I think, probably the real ask for board directors. So we get very specific about our particular company.
Thanks,
Right.
Rob. Oh,
Should I very quickly?
Very
I'm going
quick.
to say risk, opportunities. If you haven't thought about AI and sustainability, you're behind the curve. There's so much opportunity, but there's also risk, like with everything else. Two sides of the coin.
Elise, final word.
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of it, which is what I will comment on is I've been in touch with a lot of CEOs. Like I said, there's a real generational shift in CEOs right now, and I've been in touch with a lot of CEOs who have been in role for a long time, who are retiring, or CFOs. And what I found is they are all taking courses on this topic, because even as CEOs running the day-to-day, particularly, the reality is every company today is a technology company. There's just no getting around it. And I would say, there was a question about the budget for board members. I would say there should be a budget for executive team members. I think the CEOs need to know this, and I think the executive team needs to know that. That's not just going to make them a good board member, it's going to make them a good executive team member.
Great. Well, I want to express my thanks to all of you for being here, and particularly to our panelists for a great discussion. I'll turn to Ted for closing remarks here.
Thanks everybody for coming today, and thanks to our panel. It's been a fantastic discussion. Hope it's an hour well spent for you all. Just wanted to highlight a couple key takeaways from the discussion. And clearly, as people and mindset matter. Elise mentioned the diversity of thought and skills, and thinking about the role as a steward and not just governance anymore, which is great. We know that so many board positions come from insiders. So is your board still seeking the infamous PLUs, people like us, rather than thinking the diversity of thought and experiences? With the additional specialized skills being sought, of course, that comes with various risks and complexities. So is this person better serving as an advisor or as a board member? One biotech director said to me, she always asks everybody if they join the audit committee, and the people who sort of flinch or say no, they say, right, that's a subject matter expert, not a director. And Hella also brought up the concept of this insight and foresight. The board needs to continue upskilling, maintaining intellectual curiosity, and growing and broadening the board's skills so that they keep continuing to ask the right questions as the world evolves. As one person put it to me, I need people to fight, not to tick boxes and to sign minutes. So with that, thank you all for all of your time today. I wish you a great rest of day.